Welcome to the History of the Ancient Near East. I'm Justin Singleton. In this lecture, we're going to discuss a rather interesting drunken sailor, Noah, and the curse that he placed upon Canaan. Now, specifically in discussing Noah's curse upon Canaan, we'll look into how Ham saw his father's nakedness and how viewing another's nakedness can be considered sinful. And then we'll look into the curse a little more, seeing that it's already fulfilled in the early Bronze Age, and finally, discuss cursing the sun. Now, just a warning here, we are going to be talking about sex quite freely, including rape. So forgive me if this is a point of contention. Now, there are many questions concerning the incident in Genesis 9 when Noah, after growing grapes, making wine, and becoming intoxicated, lies naked in his tent only to have his nakedness looked upon by his son, Ham. In fact, there's a long list of the possible interpretations of Genesis 9, 20 through 29. This passage has been claimed as evidence for the theocratic approval of the American slave trade. It's also been used to condemn both incest and homosexuality. It's also been used to suggest the castration of the father in some sort of attempted coup d'etat by the son. Now, as the passage describes, after being looked upon, Noah awakens and realizes what Ham has done, and so he curses Ham's son, Canaan, prophesying that Canaan will be a slave to his brothers. Now, the obvious problem of why Canaan was cursed instead of Ham will be attempted to be solved, though only with a hypothesis. Another possibility to add to the very long list of other possibilities. Concerning the question of why Noah became drunk, there's no acute answer. It should be noted that the biblical text does not discuss if what Noah did was sinful. Genesis 9 simply states as fact what happened, and the author emphasizes that wrong committed against Noah rather than any wrong Noah may have performed. Because the text adds emphasis to the sin against Noah, that's what we're going to emphasize here. The concept of Ham looking upon his father's nakedness is troublesome for many, particularly those who live in Western cultures where moral principles concerning the exposure of skin, are minimal. Because the concept of looking upon the naked skin of one's father as sin is problematic, several theories have developed in an attempt to correct the fogginess of the passage. Some scholars have argued that Noah had just had sex with his wife, or was in the middle of having sex with his wife, and therefore Ham was watching. Some scholars suggest that Ham had just had sex with his own mother, Noah's wife. Some scholars suggest Ham had sex with Noah. Some suggest that Ham simply looked upon his father's nakedness. And some suggest that Ham castrated Noah in some sort of attempted coup d'etat. Now, the concept of anything sexual within the text seems reaching, so it's difficult to accept any of those views. Now, it's true that the uncovered nakedness concept in Leviticus 18, 6-11, and verses 15 through 19 is interpreted as a euphemism for sex, but in this case, Noah uncovered himself. Now, even if that could be interpreted as Noah having sex with his own wife and Ham viewing the act, the issue is still viewing. Furthermore, in the very next paragraph, the other two brothers entered the tent backwards in order to cover their sleeping father without viewing his nakedness, something that obviously wouldn't have occurred if Noah's nakedness included some sort of sexual act. Now, the idea of castration of the father has precedence in ancient Near Eastern literature, particularly in the overthrow of El by Baal. But if this were the case here, surely the brothers wouldn't simply walk backwards to cover their father Instead, obviously, they would render first aid. They would, cauterize the wound. They would have to give direct attention rather than simply not looking. Therefore, this too doesn't seem to fit the text. In our modern culture, nakedness appears to be something to be proud of and exhibit, which is why all these other theories have popped up. Surely it couldn't have been viewing somebody's nakedness. But in the ancient world, the viewing of another's naked body, when one has no right to do so, was considered a shameful act. Herodotus, in the Histories, tells of one Condylus, who believed his wife to be the most beautiful woman alive and wanted to prove it to his good friend and bodyguard, Gyges, by having his wife stand naked before the man. Gyges very adamantly argued against such an idea. "Master," he said, "what an unsound suggestion, that I should see my mistress naked. When a woman's clothes come off, she dispenses with her modesty as well. Men have long ago made wise rules from which one ought to learn. One of these is that one should mind one's own business. As for me, I believe that your queen is the most beautiful of all women, and I ask you not to ask of me what is lawless." Similarly, in the book of Esther, it's suggested that Queen Vashti was commanded to appear before the king and his men in the nude, but the queen refused to do so, as the command was considered to be outrageous and outside of societal norms. In fact, there's no record at the time that this was anything but atypical. Now, it should be noted that nakedness itself is not considered shameful, but the public viewing of one's nakedness brings shame upon the naked individual. Several biblical passages mention the link between one's nakedness and the shame of showing it. Isaiah 47:3 says, "Your nakedness will be uncovered, your shame also will be exposed." Nahum 3:5, "Behold, I am against you, says the Lord of hosts. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame." Revelation 3:18, "I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may become rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and that the shame of your nakedness will not be revealed." And Revelation 16:15, "Behold, I'm coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked, and men will not see his shame." Now, it's important to notice that Noah was uncovered inside his own tent, which would be equivalent today to being naked inside one's own bedroom. Now, Noah is not said to have done anything wrong in sleeping naked. In fact, the quick viewing of his father would probably not be condemned as well. But rather, it's what Ham did afterward, at least in my view, that brought the condemnation. Now, a West Semitic legend, the Achat epic, most likely concerned with the annual summer drought, helps to alleviate some of the confusion. Although much later than the actual event, obviously, Achat dates to within a century of the writing of Genesis. In the story, Daniel wants a son. For 7 days he makes offerings and he lies before the gods. Finally, Baal takes compassion on him and helps to fulfill Daniel's desires. Now, within the story, Daniel explains why he wants a son. He says he wants a son to set up a stela. Sorry, I was reading a bit funny. Okay, let me allow you guys to read with me. He wants to set up a stela for his divine ancestor, Daniel's divine ancestor, a votive marker for his clan in the sanctuary, to send his incense up from the earth. What else could a son do? The son, he wants a son to sing a song of his burial place from the dust, to shut the jaws of his abusers, to drive off his oppressors, to hold his hand when he's drunk, to support him when he's full of wine. He needs a son to eat his grain offering in the temple of Baal, his portion in the temple of El, to patch his roof when it gets muddy, to wash his clothes when they get dirty. Obviously, there's this concept in the ancient Near East of a son helps his father when he's old. Well, having a son obviously was considered a great blessing. The son would take care of his aging father, but he would also shut the jaws of abusers and drive off oppressors. A son's duty was to keep his father's honor intact at all costs. This included helping his father when he's drunk. Now, we're not told that Noah did anything wrong that night. He drank too much wine, became overheated, decided to sleep. Ham enters, sees his father, and then rather than to keep his father's dignity, we read the following. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers who were outside. Genesis 9:22. Now, it's not shameful to be naked in one's own tent, but there's shame in a public display of one's nakedness. Ham dishonored his father, no doubt violating time-held customs concerning the caring for one's father's reputation. Important to the story is the cursing of Canaan rather than cursing Ham. As noted before, this is somewhat enigmatic, as Canaan didn't commit the sin, at least not according to the passage. Here the text reads, "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves he will be to his brothers." He also said, "Worthy of praise is the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God enlarge Japheth's territory in numbers. May he live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be his slave." Now, one of the problems with reading these texts is that the passage of time eludes the reader. The reader is unaware of when Noah planted the vineyard or when he became drunk, and as such, the reader is unaware of what family members were also present. Was Canaan there with Ham? I don't know. One suggestion as to why Canaan was cursed instead of Ham involves the theory of castration, namely that Ham castrated his father and prevented his son from having a fourth child. Therefore, Noah cursed Ham's fourth child. Now, as noted before, there's no evidence within the text that castration was implied, and a plain reading of the text suggests that the sin was one of dishonor rather than castration, which would be to supplant one's father's leadership. Another suggestion is that Canaan was in fact the child of Ham and Canaan's grandmother, Ham's mom, a theory involving maternal incest. In this theory, Noah attempted to sleep with his wife, but being drunk, Ham instead slept with his mother, siring Canaan. Again, the text nowhere suggests any sexual act, whether paternal or maternal incest, and therefore such an origin for Canaan is highly unlikely. Additionally, the biblical text does not shy away from explaining the origins of Moab and Ammon as paternal, father and daughter's incest, nor does it shy away from talking about rape in general. The idea that Ham had sex with his mother and therefore sired an entire people group simply does not appear in the text. Well, from the biblical text, we learn that Ham had children that established prominent nations: Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. Of particular interest, archaeologically, we learn that the Canaanites of Abraham's day were not aboriginal to the land. There was, in fact, a group before them. There's a material culture break between Chalcolithic Canaan and early Bronze Canaan, meaning that at some point the Canaanites of Abraham's day had moved into the land where others had already dwelt. One suggestion for this move is that the trade network between Egypt and Byblos at the time allowed Semites from Byblos to move southward closer to Egypt. Additionally, cultural affinities with the Kura-Roxas tradition are seen in the land, suggesting a Caucasian presence. as well as DNA from the land showing Caucasian presence. As often occurs when two cultures collide, the dominant culture usually supplants the non-dominant culture. Now, it's not known exactly what happened to the aboriginal inhabitants of Canaan, possibly moving north to the Phoenician coast, as we discussed in a previous lecture. But the later Semitic and Caucasian peoples who lived there appear to have kept the place name. This means that the Canaanites that Joshua faced were not the Canaanites that were cursed. In fact, due to the harsh Baalism in the land, the Israelites were not supposed to subjugate the people of the land, as the curse requires, but rather to destroy or remove them. So, when was the curse fulfilled? Long before Abraham even entered the land, the curse of Canaan becoming slaves to Shem, northern Levant, and Japheth, the Caucasus, had already occurred when new peoples moved into the land whose material culture we knew as the early Bronze Age. Now, it's noteworthy to point out that the sin committed against Noah was that of a son against his father. And likewise, the curse of Canaan was against the son of the father who sinned. Although conjecture, it's possible that the father, Ham, was cursed to have a child just like himself. This didn't carry over to all of Ham's children, but to his youngest, one who would establish a nation that would not survive long in the world, being supplanted by foreigners at the turn of the early Bronze Age. The aboriginal cursed Canaanites were lost to history thousands of years ago. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. As always, feel free to reach out to me if you need anything.